look to be good now.
All right, let's go. What's the effective leg strength exercises for sprinting? Effective leg strength exercises for sprinting. How can we do, or what exercises are going to give us leg strength that's effective for sprinting? Okay, so what do you think we can do here? I think first is just identify. Gosh, we've got a lot of papers here, a lot of studies. First, identify one, if we're sprinting, right? There is going to be forces upwards of 5 to 6 times your body weight. So first, I think it's important to identify what type of strength do you need to sprint. Second, it's important to identify that what is sprinting, right? So some people need clarity over sprinting being done with an able-bodied individual who can use their legs for locomotion, okay, and use their legs for locomotion at higher speeds. And so if we can think about essentially moving from a walk to a jog, and if I remember correctly, I think a walk to a jog is like happens around like 2.5 to 3 miles per hour, something like that. There's actually like literally numbers that are very sort of specific for humans to essentially go from that walk to a jog, and then from that jog to a run, and then a run to the sprint. So I think it's also important to look at and say, okay, you've got a jog, or if we're out jogging, we're going to be going pretty slow, like 3 miles per hour, 4 miles per hour, somewhere along those lines. Then if we start running, okay, I'm going out for a run. Let's say we're running between 5 and 7 miles per hour. That's where you're definitely going at a quicker pace than a jog, but you're not actually sprinting. Then if we're sprinting, well, now we can think about running upwards of like 17 miles an hour, right? That would be like a pretty aggressive sprint for most human beings, not counting the like world-class sprinters. But even then, they would still essentially be sprinting, right? So moving at a rapid clip typically down track, down a runway, down a field, on a court, somewhere along those lines. So that's what sprinting is going to be defined as. And when we're sprinting at those higher speeds, and we identify those higher speeds, world-class sprinters will get 5.5 to 6 times ground reaction forces into their body. Somebody who's not as talented or not as fast might see forces that are 4.5 times their body weight. But in regards to those forces are going to be applied into the ground, and then we'll come back into the body, and we'll take this vertical energy, which then gets transferred into this horizontal locomotion. And that's essentially the easiest way to think about sprinting. So if we're looking at it from a strength perspective, we have to identify, I believe anyway, we have to identify a couple different factors. First, if we're looking at sprinting strength, okay? So what is a maximal action or a maximal voluntary contraction that we can get that will be applied to that rapid rate of locomotion? Then the next thing that we have to do is think about so we have a maximal voluntary contraction. Then we have to think about the timeline. Okay, so the timeline in which this is happening is ungodly fast if we're sprinting. Okay, so we have to think then in this timeline is going to be happening at very high speeds, or happening at very short, time frames. So you'll have these very short time frames to apply a massive amount of force. Okay, so we have to factor that in, and then we have to look at, okay, what are supporting qualities that will provide the strength or provide the stability. And I actually like to think about it as providing the stability to enable an athlete to be able to move rapidly down the track, or down a pitch, or down a runway, whatever that might be. Okay, so we have to look at also the ranges of motion. Okay, so if we're sprinting, it's pretty easy to see that most people sprinting run in a relatively similar fashion. So we have some individuals that, if we get into the nuance of sprinting technique, they'll argue that frontside mechanics are worthless, or they'll argue that backside mechanics are worthless. Then we have people that do great research here in Pennsylvania at Westchester, on things like whip from the hip, and actually understanding how they've provided this tremendous understanding for how the hip works at top speeds. So we have to look at mobility in the joints, and what the mobility is needed to develop that sprint speed. We have to look at the timeline to provide stability for sprint speed. Then we have to look at the strength needed to provide the stability in those specific joints to enable sprint speed, to enable effective sprinting. So there's a couple big things at play when we're starting to look at it and we're starting to break things down and understand all facets of locomotion. So the big question then becomes, can sprint speed be increased from weight room training? And I think it's immediately important to look at, first of all, who's the population? Okay, if we're talking about untrained individuals, okay, literally people who've barely ever worked out. If we get individuals who are untrained and they do leg strengthening movements like a back squat, based off, this is not anecdotal, this is based off peer-reviewed research, you can improve sprint speed with leg strengthening exercises. So a back squat, a front squat, a clean. There's data on this. There's papers on this. We have to remember the population is usually going to be novice individuals. Okay, so if they're studying how some kid who's 18 years old, he's never exercised, they time him in a 20-yard sprint, then he does back squats for, let's say, 12 weeks. He increases his back squat by 30 pounds, and then he does a 20-yard sprint again. His 20-yard sprint will be faster, but he was untrained. Now, as we start to progress down that timeline of if they're intermediately trained individuals, are they going to be elite individuals? That's where we'll start to see a little bit more nuance. We usually would still see a positive response from intermediately trained individuals with weight room based training. So I think that we have to look at then, does the question here, the debate is less so about, does weight room training improve speed? And everybody say, yes, no, blah, blah, blah. Does weight room training improve joint integrity in the ankle, in the knee, in the hip? Okay. I would say it's pretty clear. Yes. Does weight room based training, okay, improve potentially maximal voluntary contractions? Yes. Okay, so at least at slower speeds, we know weight room training will have probably a pretty big impact at the start and likely during acceleration. Okay, does weight room based training improve mobility? It can, for sure. Does weight room based training improve force output in a very short time frame? It can, with the right modalities. So that's where I think it's really important, is to dissect these questions as deeply as possible to get that response, instead of saying, yes, no, it doesn't happen, there's no sports specificity, yes, there's sports specificity, whatever it is, there's a lot of nuance. What leg strength exercises positively impact sprint speed, if that's the case? So essentially what we can get into then is, if we're looking at, and Nick Hatfield just asked the question, what's up, Steve? I see you in there. Nick Hatfield actually just asked this question, is speed work going to come into peak strength? So peak strength is our strength training, app. Peak Strength is a strength training app. It's been designed by myself, along with our software designers, and sprint work, speed work is coming into the app no later than June. Okay, so we're going to be building out these programs this month, next month. We're adding in a whole bunch of new exercises and a whole new system around building these programs. It's going to be freaking incredibly awesome. Some of the work that's going to go in on the back end is going to be super, super intense, and is going to be very in-depth, but it's going to be literally like how we use resistance-based training. You're going to have access to that. How we use unloaded training, you're going to have access to it, and things like that. So it's like, if we go back to this and say, what leg strengthening exercises positively impact sprint speed? In theory, we could say leg strengthening exercises could be sprinting with a sled, okay? Leg strengthening exercises could be single leg squat. Leg strengthening exercises could be front squats. Leg strengthening exercises could be a leg press. Movements are going to increase sprint speed, but we also have to make sure that on this seesaw that we're weighting, we have weight, like we're actually not weight on the bar, but we're actually looking at it and saying, okay, we need to make sure that we are getting enough sprint work in, and we need to make sure we're getting enough strength work in to provide stability. And then we need to make sure that in that formula of speed, we're looking at strength, we're looking at impulse work together, because that's essentially going to lead to that sprinting performance. And so we need to make sure that that's all balanced out. Are there leg exercises that negatively impact sprint speed? So a lot of people, when I was coming up, growing up, so I graduated high school in 2002. When I was growing up, I remember reading, like, you don't want to train your quads because, what's up, Owen? I saw you did text me about your feeling better, but I have not texted you back. I'm going to get back to you. So a lot of coaches growing up would say, you don't want to train your quads because if you train your quads, they'll get really big and they'll apply more braking forces if you ground your foot negatively in relative comparison to where your center of mass is. So if you're sprinting at top end speed and your foot is landing too far in front of your center of mass, you're going to have even greater braking forces because your quads are too big or too strong, and that's going to slow you down. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's accurate. I think in the sense of quad exercises will make you slow. I think if you're training things effectively and you have really strong quads, you're probably going to accelerate really well. You're probably going to know how to push and extend really, really well. You're probably going to know, yeah, it did take my beard. You're going to know how to apply a massive amount of force very quickly with those quad strengthening exercises. And then we have to make sure that when we get to top end speed and we start rolling with things really well, there's going to be a very fine line of where we want that foot grounding. And in most cases, the foot will likely ground slightly in front of your center of mass, but we can't let it get too far in front of our center of mass because that's when we start collapsing forward and we're basically decelerating. There's sort of this gray area of where it can ground directly underneath us, maybe just slightly in front of our center of mass, depending upon the individual's mechanics and also their, how they're built. So those are some factors that we've got to bring into play. So are there leg exercises that negatively impact sprint speed? Maybe if we find that there's a movement that inhibits mobility or something along those lines, it can happen. Now, how do you program lower body strength for your athletes to increase speed? I think, again, this just goes back into identifying the ability of the individual and where they're at. Okay, so if you have an individual who is younger, it's easy to just break it down and say, okay, this kid's 12 years old, he needs to squat more. This kid's 15 years old, he needs a single leg squat more. Okay, now this kid's 16 years old, he needs to do more plyometrics. Okay, this kid's 17 years old, we need to do more resisted sprinting. Okay, this kid's 18, 19 years old, okay, we need to do longer sprints like 40 to 60 meters and try and pull up his acceleration because of what we're doing with those longer sprints. So I think that that's really, really important. Owen just brought in the question, why do full range of motion strength exercises help sprinting so much when the range of motion of sprinting is so limited as far as quads go? Like something like back squats. So I'm assuming Owen's saying full range of motion back squats, why do they transfer really well with, let's say, athletes to improve their sprint speed? I believe it's going to have a lot to do with what happens with their glute activation, quad activation, and based off of acceleration. All of acceleration is essentially quads and glutes. And if you're training through that full range of motion, especially at the bottom and then at the very top of the range of motion, you're going to get a ton of glute activity. So that's where it does transfer quite well. So I think that that's important to think through with that lens. I think, moving forward, how do I program lower body strength for athletes to increase speed? I think it's really going to be dependent on what am I trying to accomplish and how old are these individuals that I'm working with? If I have I'm going to try and actually build out like a real quick example here. I don't know if this is going to, okay, so if I go there versus here, okay, so if I have this set up here, and I just have a workout where I'm saying, okay, I'm going to try and build lower body strength for your athletes. First, I'm going to look at like a leg power day, right? So let's do, maybe this would be a little bit better if I would increase this and put in, where is all of my, there we go. If I insert here like a little table, okay, so let's just go down like this. Okay, so let's pretend that this is leg power day. Okay, so you guys can see this pretty well. Okay, so let's say that I have somebody, and this is a big factor here, is that if we start with acceleration, we can see, let's say somebody runs a 40, and we can see on our timing gates that when they run a 40, they run a 5-second 40. Let's just pretend, but we have a gate at 10, 20, and 30 yards, and we can see that they're very slow getting to 10 yards. They take 2 seconds to get to 10, and then they run the next 30 yards in 3 seconds. Well, then I'm going to come backwards and say, okay, I'm looking at those numbers. Those numbers are telling me this individual probably has a terrible vertical jump. They probably stink at broad jumping, and they probably are very, very weak. But then once they get moving, once they have that overcoming strength taken care of, now they can roll really quickly. So initially I'm going to say leg power day. Let's look at, okay, let's do a 2-box snatch here, and let's say, I'll just do 2 columns so that you guys can see this pretty clearly. Let's say that we're doing, 6x2 auditory command to work on their quick reaction. And then we can get into, now we want to focus more on their strength of their glutes. Let's say back squat here, and I'll put in like a 2B here. And let's just say with 2B, let's say we're like 10 weeks out from the season, I'll actually do something to like target their hamstrings or their quads, depending upon where they're weak. So this might look like, let's say Nordics. Okay. And we'll do, I'll talk you through this. We'll do 5 triples unbroken. Okay. Here. And then we'll do 5x3, rapid AF, concentric. Okay, so we really want them to think about coming up as quickly as possible. So now we're gonna be training the hamstrings in conjunction with that compound movement to try and get a little bit better intramuscular coordination between that back squat. Now we get into let's just say dumbbell RDL, and then let's work on some easy, let's say like single leg glute bridge just for that pump. Let's just say it's like 4x9. Let's say here 4x7, and you guys could take this and go hit this workout today. If you're checking this out on the YouTube broadcast, you're seeing an actual leg power day built for speed. So we're looking at how do you program lower body strength for your athletes to increase speed. So this is a good example. Okay, and then let's say that we finish off here just with like reverse hypers, and maybe I do a banded, but we'll just do like 2 sets of 17 for posterior chain. Now this is going to be like what we're looking at if we have somebody who's like really slow in acceleration. Okay, they don't have a good start. They're just really, really lagging. Now, there's other athletes that tend to be super, super explosive starters, like really, really strong, very explosive out of the blocks, they accelerate through 15 to 20 meters really, really well. But then they struggle to hold those positions, or maybe they don't have the mobility when they start to transfer their speed. So in this case, I would use an impulse day or an athlete day. So let's say it's an athlete day. I'm going to put in here a table. Okay, so let's go here. Let's just go like this. Okay, so let's say PVC pipe walks, and let's do the PVC walks with let's say ISO split lunge, dorsiflexed ankle. Okay, so they're in a split lunge position. Let's go 5x15 meters racing, and then let's go 5x30 seconds each side. And what we want to see here is some stability through the ankle joint and through the soleus, and then lengthening of the Achilles. Now we can get into here where now, okay, we got an athlete day. I want to focus on, remember we talk about I had to take. Why wouldn't you front squat on the snatch? You know, Steve just asked a freaking awesome question. Why would I back squat on the snatch day when I could front squat on that day if I'm going to clean on the other day? I was thinking in this case, Steve, I wouldn't be cleaning on the other day. He's asking, do you usually front squat on snatch day and back squat on clean day? That's almost always what I would recommend doing, and that's almost always what I do. So in this case, like 100%. Okay, I agree with what Steve's saying. And you guys polled in, you said, 55 of you said, what sports need sprint training the most? American football, soccer, baseball, lacrosse. And it's interesting because only 1% said lacrosse and soccer, or 1% said baseball and lacrosse, and then 32% said soccer, 63% said football. I think what's interesting with that is that when we're breaking down our sport depths, American football will be a depth too. So there's a lot of speed and there's a lot of impulse, a lot of power output. Depth 4 is lacrosse and soccer. Lacrosse and soccer have a continuous go. They're constantly going. But they've got to be really fast. So you've got to be able to toe the fine line of like, how do we get a lacrosse player or a soccer player to be really fast but also have endurance? And so I think that we've just got to be aware there's quite a bit of speed in soccer and in lacrosse. And then obviously there's going to be a lot of speed in baseball, a lot. I'm actually we did that one video a couple weeks ago on Ricky Henderson. I was thinking about that. But anyway, I'm going to get back into this because I think it's important now that if you can figure out that someone has, like, let's say they have a bad vertical jump and they struggle with turnover at like 25 to 50 yards, something like that. They struggle with the short time frame. Okay, so if you think about starting and acceleration, you have a longer time frame for force application. Okay, so that's where you'll see tremendous carryover of strength movements. Where you'll see better carryover from the weight room, from your weight room training into sprinting, is going to be at faster speeds with plyometric movements. Okay, so if we're trying to improve those top speeds, we should use plyometric movements because our force production or our force action that we're trying to apply, our force application, is going to be a much slower time frame. So in this case, let's say single leg mini hurdles, hops, okay, and then here 2B would be let's say broad jump to bound to hurdle hop. Broad jump to bound, okay? And then I'm going to go through here and I'm going to say, okay, now what exercise really transfers best, okay, to sprinting speed? And I truly believe that if we would prioritize an athlete day exercise, okay, if you see me highlighting this on YouTube, this section here is more like the primer, okay? Or more like the wake-up call. This section here, the single leg mini hurdle hops into broad jump, that's more like the primer. This section, priority. Okay, again, this is the stuff that you guys are going to see in the speed portion of peak strength, and this is how athlete days are currently laid out in peak strength. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, 4A, we would get into here. Let's just say we finish off with like stair jumps, and let's go like single leg reverse bands, just to help increase joint stiffness. So here we're doing like 5 sets of 3 each side, 5 sets of 1, 2, and then we would go into single leg broad jumps, and that's a priority. So I would try and do like 7 sets of 5 broads on each leg, and that's where you're going to start to see kids. If you can hit kids. If you get kids to go like broad, single leg broad jump, and obviously there's going to be a need for a progression here. So a kid that we have in 9th grade probably can't do a single leg broad jump, but what they can do, I'll give you the progression on the screen, is they could start off with something like a jump step up, okay? Jump step up, then they get into jump lunge, then they get into, let's say, Russian lunge, then they get into after the Russian lunge, let's say that they get into skips for distance, and then they get into mini hurdle mini hurdle hops, single leg, and then after they do the mini hurdle hops, single leg, then they get into broad jumps, single leg. Okay. Broad jumps on a single leg are really, really challenging, but this is a really good progression you can follow to build into that. Okay, so this is how I would build out this speed day, this athlete day speed day, and then this is all done in the weight room. Okay, so this is training you to have a large amount of strength and to be explosive and to be strong and to react in short time frames. Okay, right here's 2 days that you guys could take and roll with. Jump lunges are absolutely freaking fantastic. Is the layout conditioned? People got decent sprint, fast running. Keith, I need you to reword that. If you can, reword that. Owen just asked, when you do single leg mini hurdles, do you do them for distance or ground contact time and speed? I would prefer ground contact time and speed, and then slowly build up the distance with a priority still on ground contact time and speed, but making sure that that's being executed pretty quickly. Yeah, let me know if that helps. Okay, so I wanted to lay that out. I thought that would be an important, thing there for you guys to see. And then if I get back here, now I'm getting back onto going into discussion here. I had two. I had the vegetable ones. Jason just brought me some samosas because Indian food's my favorite food on the planet. Thanks, Jason. He was bringing me chicken samosas. Ironically, I love chicken samosas, but I prefer vegetable samosas, and I usually will judge a Indian restaurant based off of how dry their vegetable samosa is and what their crust looks like. Okay, I like a little bit crispier crust on my samosas. So there's a new spot about 10 minutes away that just came into town for Indian. Okay, so today was the first day I tried it. Vegetable samosas, if my tried and true hometown vegetable samosas that I usually get, if they're like a 9.5 out of 10, this place was like a 6.8 to a 7.2, which is a really good start. Not too dry with the vegetables. I prefer a little bit crispier crust, but it was definitely their vegetable samosas were definitely homemade samosas. So that's my analysis there. Now let's get into some lower body strength work for sprinting. I think that I want to show you guys just some old school, let's get into some real simple stuff here. Look, I don't know what happened to that shirt. And I'm going to start right now. Somebody should comment does anyone know what Punjabi samosas? I don't know. Maybe. Does anybody know the group that I'm wearing, the shirt that I'm wearing? I don't know what happened to that shirt, though. I need to find it. There's Jan doing some work. Look, isn't it crazy that we just had that in that program? Okay, so lower body strength training for sprints. Here's a couple exercises. Let's get into, let's go right here. Okay. That's block work. We sort of talked about that pretty well already. So if I can accelerate, we want to think about. Okay, so max speed, maximum mechanics was where we're talking about that short contact time, very, very quick contact period, and we've got to be able to handle that. It's going to help us be faster. But if we're leaning forward, so we're seeing that. Okay, let's talk about. We got some hinge lunges there. Okay. We got power clean on command, which we talked. We got front squat. We got single leg squats. Guys comes into play. I love single leg squats. Oh, what is that? That's it's a unilateral movement. 182 with Brandon. Look at that. 2, single leg squat. Your glutes, your hamstrings, and 3, it's gonna force the athlete to stay upright. We want to cue our athletes to stay upright. We don't want forward leaning. I have seen tons of athletes drop their 40. Called Nordic hamstring curls. I like calling them hamstring pulls. The main reason why I love there we go right there. We can train through that long eccentric portion, and we can get. I just got a really good programming question there. How do you mix the programming with sport specific practices like sprinting or in season? That's a great one. Any good exercises to target the serratus anterior muscles? Ooh. Yo, Taiwo, shout out to little brother coming through. I'm impressed. Some sprint coaches or some coaches might say our calf exercise is good for minimizing the ground contact time. That's where I would say, if you've ever seen the video of the Maasai doing like pogo hops, To me, that's a calf exercise, soleus exercise, and that's going to help you minimize ground contact time. And that's why I like doing single leg reverse bands as well. That's something similar that I do really like doing. Here's another one, a video that came out last year. Okay, so this one's last year. This is the best exercise for speed training. Did this with Cooper. Cooper had run like a 4.49 in the 40, running back at Syracuse.
But it is the weight if they struggle with stability. And
so this is one thing I've found with the single leg squats, and what happens here is a lot of individuals will say, they'll do a single leg squat and they'll be like, yo, it's not the weight, it's the balance. And the thing is, the reason why it ends up transferring really well to sprinting is that balance improves. And if it's balance is the problem, then it is the weight. Like, it's one of those discussions that I always have with athletes that's really, really unique. And the reason why we're showing you those single leg squats is that we're going to get into a paper that actually breaks down the Bulgarian split squat, the single leg squat, and what that means for sprinting. So now we're going to get into, I'm going to show you this right here, this video here. We can start to talk about Olympic lifts for sprinting. Okay, so weightlifting derivatives for sprint speed.
Skills can get honed in on, and if they're trained in the weight room, they can actually help
crazy.
the athlete perform a little bit
I had to have weighed like
and so
260 back then.
Understanding the competitive Olympic lifts, the variations of the Olympic lifts, and the reflexive Olympic lifts is going to be a key component behind laying out what are those top 4 key Olympic lifting variations that you can utilize to run faster. So coming in at that number 4 spot, we've got a power clean where we want to pause in the catch. And the reason why I really like to utilize
must have been like peak
power
COVID
clean
time.
Pause in the catch.
Okay, pause in the catch.
Okay, a dumbbell
Boom.
drop snatch to a box.
This is one of my favorites.
This movement is going.
This is like one of those exercises that if you've got a guy that can back squat 550 and he still runs really slow, do this movement, do the dumbbell drop snatch, because it teaches you, I think it helps with the concept from Ken Clark, that whip from the hip concept. I think it really helps you feel that quick reaction.
So when you do a hang clean, there's an eccentric loading, and it's going to help you now.
Balls below the knee power snatch. There we go. Okay, so I want to get into, before we get into the rest of the questions inside the chat, I think if we can just keep reiterating the importance and the thought process around what it means to sprint 15 plus miles per hour, a very large amount of force is transferred from the ground back into the body, 5 times body weight. So your body has to be able to do that. You have to do it in an ungodly, very short period of time. So if you're putting force into the ground and running at top speed, you're looking at, like, I think it's a 0.1 seconds, even slow, or even faster than that, 0.08, something like that. Very, very short ground contact periods. But we've got to build the body to be able to handle that. And the thing is that you can start to break down the phases of the sprints or the phase of how a sport that an individual plays, and you can say you can assign weight room movements to those phases. So if I'm looking at somebody with a terrible start, we're going to do a snatch, we're going to focus on squats, we're going to focus on bigger bilateral movements. Okay, if we look at somebody, they struggle with acceleration and getting to top speed, I'm going to focus more on, I'm probably still going to do weightlifting movements, and I'm going to also use things like the single leg squats and some more sled work. Okay, then if I have somebody who struggles to hold max velocity, max speed, we're going to run more sprints. We're going to do more things like plyometrics. We're going to do more specific work. So it's like a real simple way to lay out that actual periodization. We actually were talking about this morning, that maybe we should be doing a little bit more educational stuff like this. Thoughts on reverse sled drags walking backwards? I think they're great. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I think they're awesome. So Owen's asking if acceleration is longer contact time than top speed. Are cleans and max squats more important to acceleration-based sports like hockey and football than snatches and vertical or broad jumps? I would say I think it's always important in sports performance. I think it's important to recognize even in this question, okay, one thing's not more important than the other. Okay, I think there's sometimes like if you pitch this question like, are squats more important than running a marathon for a football player? Like, yes, it's going to be more black and white. But I think in this one, I think it's much more of like snatches and cleans are going to transfer to start and acceleration across the board. Okay, squats, single leg squats, I would say yes. And I think the thing that I'm going towards here is that vertical jumps like plyometric work will still have a positive impact on acceleration because it will help you fire faster and decelerate quicker too. Or our contact times for snatches and cleans the same, just different weights. You're going to be, I would think personally, I would argue that's too nuanced. I don't think it's worth getting stuck in that thought process, to be fair. Increases in lower body strength transfer positively to sprint performance. So, this is a meta-analysis. Remember, this is where we're going to be looking at multiple different papers. This has 510 subjects, 26 experiments, okay? 15 studies, 510 subjects. There's a transfer between increases in lower body strength and sprint performance as indicated by a very large significant correlation between squat strength, ES and ES. I should have focused on what I'm trying to go back. Okay. Effect sizes. So effect sizes between squat strength and sprint effect sizes. Additionally, the magnitude of sprint improvement is affected by level of practice and body mass. So that's another big factor. If you're heavier, squatting is going to help you more than if you're lighter. The frequency of resistance training sessions per week, and the rest interval between sets of resistance training. So that's also interesting, is talking about how much rest that you'd be taking. Conversely, the magnitude of sprint improvement is not affected by the athlete's age. The resistance training methods used through the training intervention, average load intensity used during the resistance, number of exercises per session, number of sets per exercise, and number of repetitions. Wow, this is pretty freaking legit. Increases in lower body strength transfer positively to sprint performance based off 510 subjects and 15 studies. The magnitude of sprint improvement is affected by numerous subject characteristics and resistance training variables, but the large difference in the number of the effect sizes available should be taken into consideration, meaning there's a large difference in reasons why and the sizes why. The reported improvement in sprint performance resulting from resistance training is of practical relevance for coaches in sporting activities. So I think this is a big one. It's like, I think about, providing you guys this easy access to freak training, right? I gave you, we did that paper. We analyzed, or we're analyzing this paper. I gave you that program that you're using. It's like, there's a lot of people out there that'll say like, oh, if squatting is going to make you slower, or you don't need to lift to get faster. And it's like, dude, it's pretty clear that if you lift weights, you're going to get faster. That doesn't mean that you need to stop sprinting or you shouldn't do plyometrics. And that's the whole thing that we're trying to convey consistently with our freak training system with peak strength, is that we're building your body to get stronger, to handle the forces. We're doing plyometric work to handle the short contact times. We're doing impulse work to help with force application in a short period of time. And we're continuously improving the system, so much so that pretty soon you're going to have all the speed stuff inside the app as well. So that's just some stuff I wanted to cover. Now, between leg mechanical differences as measured by the Bulgarian split squat. So basically they're looking at what are the differences left leg to right leg with asymmetries in the relationships. Okay, so what they did is some people struggled to find a method to measure this to measure leg strength differences for sprint acceleration. We see a study here that analyzes 5-rep max for Bulgarian split squat, and they're taking people to a 5-rep max and to identify between leg differences for the dominant and non-dominant legs in peak and mean power. Okay, so that's pretty important. Force and velocity as measured by a linear position transducer. So someone's got this on them, and how much peak force, mean power, velocity, what do they get to? And then they're looking at these between leg differences, okay, in these variables. So they're looking at left leg to right leg, what happens? Okay, so these variables were correlated with 20 meters sprint velocity, okay? 8 men were assessed with the 5 rep max. Well, they're looking at a 20-meter sprint, and they're testing their 5 rep single leg squat. So they're going through and they're comparing the dominant and non-dominant legs. There were significant differences in 11 out of 12 variables. However, percentage differences were very low. So there was differences, but the percent of the difference was fairly low. There was one large non-significant correlation, best repetition mean force between leg differences in 0 to 5 meters per second out of the 36 relationships. Bulgarian split squat can provide a profile of between leg differences in power, force, velocity. There were limited relationships between the Bulgarian split squat and the 0 to 20 sprint velocities. Smaller between leg differences could ensure minimal impact on acceleration. So to me, it's like you can take single leg squats and you can say, all right, if we can just keep kids within 3 to 5% of their best on each leg. Like little Johnny can single leg squat 200 pounds on his left leg. Let's make sure he can single leg squat 200 pounds on his right leg, and don't go up unless he can do both. In that case, you're going to be able to make sure that peak velocity, average velocity, average force are pretty much equated. Okay. And then we're going to get into this last one here. This is a recent one. If you check this out here, February of 24, Olympic weightlifting training for sprint performance in athletes, another systematic review. Okay, so let's look at the systematic review. They're looking at whether weightlifting exercises would improve sprint performance when compared to a control. So the big thing here, remember that this is about comparison to the control group. Okay, so this doesn't necessarily mean that let's just get into the control. Okay, so the control, no training, standard sports specific training, traditional resistance training, or plyometric training. That's the control. Okay, so they're comparing weightlifting exercises to someone who's not doing any training, or they're comparing them to someone who's doing sports specific training, or they're comparing weightlifting exercises to traditional resistance training or weightlifting movements to plyometrics. Sorry. So if we're going through this and we're saying two authors independently selected studies, okay, extracted data, certainty of the evidence was assessed using a grading of recommendations assessment to make sure everything was kosher. The primary meta-analysis combined the results of sprint performance over the full length of each sprint test. The secondary meta-analysis combined the results of the sprint performance at 5, 10, and 20 meters. So this is all acceleration based up to 20 meters. 8 studies with 206 athletes around 20 years old were identified. 206 athletes, 20 years old. Sprint performance did not differ significantly comparing Olympic weightlifting to the control intervention, nor at full length or during the acceleration phase of the sprint test. So here's the Dane is eating his words. O-lifting training does not improve sprint performance to a greater extent than comparator interventions. I don't know comparator. I don't know what that word means right there. Now, what is my interpretation as a weightlifting coach when I read this? Okay. First, there's papers I would go back to and say, well, there's some papers that say that cleans do improve sprint performance. Snatches do improve sprint performance. Snatches do improve these things. The way I interpret papers like this, okay, first, it's important to recognize it's a meta-analysis. It's comparing a lot of different stuff, and it's pretty freaking good. So in my system, the way I'm going to look at that is then say, okay, is this saying that we should just stop doing this altogether, or at least in these studies, do they see anything that it was negative? And or that's the next thing for me personally, is I look at it and say, okay, there's nothing negative about it. It's more so, okay, it doesn't improve relative to that to the control. So the big factor then is just taking that step back and then looking at those other papers and then trying to weigh these papers together and say, well, there's some papers that say this, there's some papers that say this. I've seen and experienced younger athletes, especially here, benefit quite a bit from weightlifting movements. And then going back to, we know plyometric exercises work phenomenally. We know that doing things like sprint mechanics works phenomenally. We know that improving, just doing more sprinting leads to greater performance. So there's more than just those weightlifting derivatives. There's also the strength components. There's also the trunk work that goes into it. There's also the reflexive work that goes into it. There's also all the other facets that go into developing an athlete. I think it's important to see when there's papers that disagree with what you do, because you almost get like, oh shoot, I got to question my entire system. And then you have to think through how to develop that system a little bit more effectively, so that in the case of, if I'm training somebody for the combine and they've never done a weightlifting movement, at least I know, like, they don't have to do the weightlifting movement. Now, if I see that their vertical jump sucks, we're going to do it. But if their vertical jump is decent and they've never done a snatch or a clean, I'm probably not going to bring it in. But if I'm training a younger athlete who needs to coordinate really well, we're going to do it. Okay, so I think that's something I did want to share. Okay. Come on, Keith, am I really that bad? If you're starting acceleration or weak, so this is Speed Power Training is asking, if your start and acceleration are weak, it's probably due to poor technique or a lack of power. To improve, focus on building. Oh, so he's answering other people's questions. Which isometrics would I recommend for sprinting? I really like a lot of ankle isometrics, actually in typically a dorsiflexed position. I actually even like just doing isometrics where you hold a start position. I also like isometrics where you hold like a glute ham position to really target the lower back, the posterior chain. Those are all things that I really do enjoy doing. I wanted to bring up a research paper where I'm going to show you some interesting stuff up on the screen here. I'm going to go back. So this is a recent paper on essentially where we're going to see a large amount of muscle tendon unit activation. So right here, muscle tendon unit activation. This paper here also just came out in May, actually this month. And basically what they get down to is that the premise that skeletal muscle adapts at a higher rate than tendon, obviously that's known, but does not require high mechanical load to hypertrophy or increase its force potential during exercise, and it's pretty much verified with this paper. The plantar flex leg demonstrated a continuous increment in maximal strain. Okay, so this might even be what I think it was Keith was also asking for exercises like this. But this to me, so muscle does not differ between a dorsiflex position that's isometric versus plantar flexed, okay, right here. But the dorsiflex position of holding like a split squat with your ankle dorsiflexed and holding that position versus holding the plantar flex position, you can sort of see right here, okay? This shows you that there was a better response in the dorsiflex position for the triceps suri. Okay, so right here, if we go back up here. So that does sort of answer your question there, Keith. I hope that helps a little bit. Any advice for marathoners from Luke B? So for marathoners, I think the big thing, one, what's the advice that you're looking for? But I think the big thing for marathoners is like making sure you're recovering, making sure you're still doing your strength work, making sure that you're following through with any mobility work around your calves and your hips, especially your TFL, and then make sure that you have, as you get close to your marathon, you're hitting really long runs. Okay, so I also wanted to let you guys know that all this stuff, like when we're doing these breakdowns, and if I hope you guys got to see our Joey Burgles podcast, we've got a couple other podcasts. We're moving the podcast, the Garage Strength podcast, now that YouTube offers that podcast portion on the channel. All the podcast stuff is going to be right on the channel. So that's going to be a regular thing. Make sure that you guys pay attention to that, or you subscribe to our podcast over on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, because we're going to be doing a lot of stuff where we get super in depth with this, and we go through our training system and our training programming, and also how we apply this in real life scenarios, because I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty important. Earl is in the building. Oh, I didn't see Earl's question, actually. I'm going to answer Owen's. Should you always train lower twitch muscles with a slow pace? I think the lower back erectors are slow twitch. So, okay. So, and I think that's where you can go sort of like back and forth. Jason, you're going to have to write that in there, just because we are going to be bringing back the channel members. So if you're part of the Garage Strength channel membership, you're going to start to get basically private podcasts with Earl and I, and then we're going to release them about 2 weeks later. So, but I want Jason to clarify that in the comments if he can, please. Now, lower back work. Okay, should it be fast, slow? There's a lot of research that shows that your lower back responds really well to longer duration sets. I would say like 70% of your training for slower twitch muscles should be longer duration. I think it's okay for like 20 to 30% to be at higher speed. Let me know if that helps. Now, I want to include high pulls in my program, but my arms seem too long for a snatch grip. How can I accommodate? I don't think your arms are too long. If Lasha and Ryan Krauser can snatch grip, so can you. What do you do if your acceleration is spot on? You get to max speed almost immediately, but don't ever really get going as to be fast from a max speed perspective. So let's say Earl's saying you get to like 17 miles per hour, but you just can't get to like 21. I think that's where Ken Clark has a couple papers, some that we've even researched, that we've reviewed here, where he sort of talks about acceleration will improve even from doing more top end speed work. So if let's just say you're running like 8 sets of 80 meter sprints, and you're taking like 5 minutes rest between those or something like that. Maybe, 5 minutes rest. In that case, you'll be training those qualities. As long as you have some technical decency, you'll train those qualities when you're running those 80 meter sprints, and you're going to improve your acceleration. So I would recommend if you accelerate very well, but then you struggle to maintain top speed, or you never really get to top speed, like your top speed is not that high, that's where I would do more top speed work. I would also, if you're experienced, possibly bring in some overspeed work, but there's a lot of like around that. I would play around with it though. Arian saying, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm a beginner weightlifter. I got the best results by following your explosive strength for Olympic weightlifting exercises. Thank you so much, Arian. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following the program. Thanks for listening through with everything. Owen, so the podcast, or that'll start, I think it'll be Tuesday. Yeah, starting next Tuesday. Podcast will be live with questions for channel members. So essentially what we're looking for is the channel members can come in and they can pose some serious questions. Basically, pick my brain and Earl's brain, and we'll get down to it. How to avoid interference in a professional fighter who fights so often periodization is impossible. What I would do, this is for Haywood, what I would do is establish like days of the week that you would be doing specific tasks. So like, how many days a week can you do LSD work? How many days a week can you do interval work? How many days a week can you resistance train? Then you lay that out. Then you look at, okay, how many days a week when I resistance train can I do impulse work? How many days a week when I resistance train can I do endurance work? And then now you start building it out that way, and you try to follow a general model. And then if you have a fight coming up, you just drastically decrease some volume. That's how I would set that up. If you get to max velocity almost immediately, your acceleration That's a great comment from Jack Van Dyke. If you get to max velocity almost immediately, your acceleration is not spot on. That's very accurate, because essentially if I get to max velocity very quickly, now this is based off of, I guess, to be fair to Jack and to Earl did not clarify if you're getting to max acceleration because of poor mechanics or if you're getting to max acceleration because of good mechanics. So that's one thing that we could just clarify there with Jack's statement. I don't believe people like Usain Bolt, Gatlin, Blake only doing the classic stuff they show us in their clips, like strength, plyometrics, sprints, weightlifting movements. They know something that we don't. That's what Mr. Oliva is saying. I think the thing is like, and I would use, and a lot of people are going to flame me for saying like Justin Gatlin's got great technique, and like they're going to talk about his positive drug test. But I think if you look at somebody, his starts, and then you look at his technique, like dude's smooth. Dude's got really, really, really good technique and moves phenomenally well. And I think it's really important to recognize those qualities. It's really important to establish a technical model. A lot of people don't realize, like, we watch, if you watch a young kid run who's like gone to like a speed coach, dude, I can go on here where it's like, we have a kid who's well trained and has been going to a speed coach for years. Didn't know how to start in a 40. I had no idea how to start. 10, flying 10 was slow. Starting 10, slow. I'm going like, dude, man, he's been going to this speed coach for a while. Butt's lower than his head, and it's like when off the start, it's like all you've got to do is, if you watch somebody like Gatlin and spend a little bit of time and clean up your technique a little bit, now you can take that strength, you can take that impulse capability, and you can apply it directly into whatever sport that you're playing, and you're never going to be as refined as those athletes, but you can at least move quicker. And I think the thing that we forget is these guys spent decades of their lives perfecting their craft and their movement patterns and sprinting at 200 meters down to 100 meters down to 40 meters back up, and it's like they spent so much time perfecting the craft in those different phases. I don't think that we can negate that work ethic and that dialed in capability. It's easy to say like, oh, they blah blah blah, they have they've got something that we don't. Well, maybe they do. They've got a better work ethic maybe. I think I'm not saying that it's bad to have that doubt to a point, but you still have to recognize and understand that they're doing some things really, really well that we can learn from. So I hope that helps. I'm in football, and my weak spot is speed off the ball. What do you recommend to help that? That's gonna be that first step, first 2 to 3 steps. Speed off the ball. That's when you're starting to look at like a hang snatch or a power clean or a pause back squat or a front squat that's with an auditory command. That's going to help you quite a bit. I got to get out of here to head down to Coaching Weightlifting. Thanks for tuning into this week's YouTube Live on how to have effective leg strength exercises for sprinting. Until next time, peace.